a combative dualism, good versus evil and all that, it ultimately winds up being a complementary one, like the yin and yang in the Tao. And that is my experience. And Fritz Leiber, a disciple of Lovecraft, pointed out why. He said Lovecraft understood primal emotion is fear, and he was trying to articulate what Rudolf Otto said, that there is the mysterium tremendum, the mystery that makes us tremble, holy terror, panic in the classic sense. The pleroma, the divine fullness in the world of finitude, is like white light broken up into the spectrum. There is a new apparent difference revealed, or is it distorted? A case of the active imagination, where you enter into the depths of unconscious and see what comes out. And he is the delight of earth and the cruelty of heaven. Man becomes paralyzed before his face. Before him there exists neither question nor answer. He is the life of creation. He is the activity of differentiation. He is the love of man. He is the speech of man. He is both the radiance and the dark shadow of man. He is deceitful reality.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true Gnosis. And today I got Dr. Robert M. Price, two-time PhD theologian, who is here, author of Zarathustra Speaks, the blog. Go check that out. It's a wonderful resource for lots of Gnosis. And we're going to start this thing off with, we're going to talk about Carl Jung and the modern state of Gnosticism in today's world, where Carl Jung sort of flipped this thing on its head with the Red Book and other books written by him, such as this last and final book, Man and Symbols. And there's a passage in here that I want to read, and I want to get your off the cusp reaction to this passage, because it's a crazy, mind-blowing thing that Carl Jung wrote. This is during his years working as a psychologist, psychiatrist, one of the two, and he's working with patients. This is before he was an author. He was in the field, and this is what he says.
The general function of dreams is to try to restore our psychological balance by producing dream material that reestablishes, in a subtle way, the total psychic equilibrium. That is what I call the complementary or compensatory role of dreams in our psychic makeup. It explains why people who have unrealistic ideas or too high an opinion of themselves, or who make grandiose plans out of proportion to their real capacities, have dreams of flying or falling. The dream compensates for the deficiencies of their personalities, and at the same time it warns them of the dangers in their present course. If the warnings of the dream are disregarded, real accidents may take their place. The victim may fall downstairs or may have a motor accident. I remember the case of a man who was inextricably involved in a number of shady affairs. He developed an almost morbid passion for dangerous mountain climbing as a sort of compensation. He was seeking to get above himself. In a dream one night, he saw himself stepping off the summit of a high mountain into empty space. When he told me his dream, I instantly saw his danger and tried to emphasize the warning and persuade him to restrain himself. I even told him that the dream foreshadowed his death in a mountain accident. It was in vain. 6 months later, he stepped off into space. A mountain guide watched him and a friend letting themselves down on a rope in a difficult place. The friend had found a temporary foothold on a ledge, and the dreamer was following him down. Suddenly, he let go of the rope, according to the guide, as if he were jumping into the air. He fell upon his friend, and both went down and were killed. Another typical case was that of a lady who was living above herself. She was high and mighty in her daily life, but she had shocking dreams, reminding her of all sorts of unsavory things. When I discovered them, she indignantly refused to acknowledge them. The dreams then became menacing and full of references to the walks she used to take by herself in the woods, where she indulged in soulful fantasies. I saw her danger, but she would not listen to my many warnings. Soon afterwards, she was savagely attacked in the woods by a sexual pervert. But for the intervention of some people who heard her screams, she would have been killed. There was no magic in this. What her dreams had told me was that this woman had a secret longing for such an adventure, just as the mountain climber unconsciously sought the satisfaction of finding a definite way out of his difficulties. Obviously, neither of them expected the stiff price involved. She had several bones broken, and he paid with his life. Thus, dreams may sometimes announce certain situations long before they actually happen. This is not necessarily a miracle or a form of precognition. Many crises in our lives have a long unconscious history. We move toward them step by step, unaware of the dangers that are accumulating. But what we consciously fail to see is frequently perceived by our unconscious, which can pass the information on through dreams. Dreams may often warn us in this way, but just as often it seems they do not. Therefore, any assumption of a benevolent hand restraining us in time is dubious, or to state it more positively, it seems that a benevolent agency is sometimes at work and sometimes not. Perhaps the commonest dream symbol of transcendence is the snake, as represented by the therapeutic symbol of the Roman god of medicine, Aesculapius, which has survived to modern times as a sign of the medical profession. This was originally a non-poisonous tree snake. As we see it, coiled around the staff of the healing god, it seems to embody a kind of mediation between earth and heaven. A still more important and widespread symbol of chthonic transcendence is the motif of the two entwined serpents. These are the famous Naga serpents of ancient India, and we also find them in Greece as the entwined serpents on the end of the staff belonging to the god Hermes. An early Grecian herm is a stone pillar with a bust of the god above. On one side are the entwined serpents, and on the other an erect phallus. As the serpents are represented in the act of sexual union, and the erect phallus is unequivocally sexual, we can draw certain conclusions about the function of the herm as a symbol of fertility. But we are mistaken if we think this only refers to biological fertility. Hermes is trickster in a different role as a messenger, a god of the crossroads, and finally the leader of souls to and from the underworld. Freud has described several cases that involve the forgetting of disagreeable memories, memories that one is only too ready to lose. As Nietzsche remarked, where pride is insistent enough, memory prefers to give way. Thus, among the lost memories, we encounter not a few that owe their subliminal state and their incapacity to be voluntarily reproduced to their disagreeable and incompatible nature.
Wow. What do you think?
Well, it makes sense in a sort of a mundane way that apparently the man was a mountain climber initially because he just enjoyed the exercise and the thrill and the views and all of that. But he kept, well, he dreamed that he was leaping tall buildings in a single bound, then it didn't work, as a way of atoning for this murder you mentioned that he had done. If he hadn't been caught, he has enough of a conscience to punish himself. He's thinking, look what I have done. I really deserve a judgment. And he saw to it that it happened. And the dream indicated that he must have subconsciously been thinking, that's what I could do to even the score. And he did. And like Jung says, it doesn't have to be precognitive, but it makes sense that this notion emerged in his mind as a way of dealing with his sin and his crime when he was above the law. Apparently, nobody knew what he had done. And the same thing with the woman. She's tempting fate. She's knowingly flirting with being attacked, etc. She knows she's in danger, which is why there's the thrill of it, and she also feels like maybe I deserve it, and so it happens. And she asked for it, though she hated and feared it, but she somehow was drawn to it. People like to be abused sometimes. So those seem fairly straightforward to me. You're kind of planning your own death, though consciously you don't think you are, but the subconscious will see to it that you get struck down for what you did. So I mean that makes a lot of sense to me.
I think it's interesting how he ends it off with talking about the Delphic oracles. Does he, maybe he's attributing that these prophets of the ancient world or these oracles are sort of like interpreting a dreamlike thing. I don't know what he's getting at with there, but it's interesting because when we do have these feelings of what do you call it when you feel like you've been somewhere before, deja vu.
Deja vu.
It's a really strange thing. Like it really feels like I feel like I just had this conversation a week ago. Or sometimes you have a dream, and in the dream, like something will be walking over to you, and it'll start talking. And all of a sudden, you're getting wake up by somebody, and there actually is a person there. It's like the dream showed you what was about to happen, and you almost wonder if there's something to this thing. But he also makes it pretty clear there's really nothing magical about this. There's something there's something about this that can be explained. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I don't know. It's interesting, but
well, I'm guessing that the person that dreams someone is approaching and then they wake up was subliminally aware of the approach. It's kind of a survival instinct.
Right.
And then you wake up to defend yourself. You know it subconsciously, and that, I mean, that's well established that happens to people. Yeah, that's in a way that is a kind of a fail safe to save face for the oracle. Well, I didn't exactly say which empire, so technically, whatever happens, she's safe. It kind of reminds me of Saul and the Witch of Endor, where he says, I gotta know what's going to happen tomorrow in the battle. And the medium calls up Samuel, and there's this ghost like Jacob Marley. And he says, why have you disturbed my rest? You should have just waited, because tomorrow we can chat at length down here. That is a great story. And of course, it's not equivocal. She's pretty much telling him, he's saying, you're going to be dead like me. You want to see me so much? Well, you're going to have plenty of opportunity down here in Sheol. Boy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then you have this whole idea of introducing like people who drink the kaikian when they tell the oracles, or in the Hindu world, in the Vedic world, they would drink the soma plant and give the oracles. And it's almost like this dreamlike state while you're awake. Because I mean, I've never hidden anything from that. I've made no mistake about it. I've experienced DMT before. It's like dreaming while you're awake. So I wonder if there's something about the dream state that makes people feel or sort of try to enact a medium or whatever that means. But for some reason, that's what people try to go with it. It seems like, whether it's true or not, and like you said, there's always that vague, fail-safe way to say things. Well, someone's going to lose, right? Like, you know what I mean? But it's interesting how when the people are in those states, even if they're wrong, they feel like there's something that they have that they can become a medium now. It's weird. It's like they think they can tell the future.
It's like you feel a unique receptivity to a larger world, and you can now sense it, whereas before the curtain was drawn across your attention. I knew a guy who was actually an apologist eventually. I can't think of his name now. It's been so many years. He said he got converted by taking LSD because he thought he would experience this oceanic Hindu sort of feeling but instead it was like Rudolf Otto, the terrifying Mysterium Tremendum, and it was Jehovah, and this converted him to Christianity. Interesting.
I believe that. Like, that's believable to me. I could see that happening.
Yeah. A student of mine once said that she went out into the woods one day and lay down and covered herself in leaves. And when she mentioned this to a shrink, he said, well, apparently you had a psychotic incident. And she was confiding this in me as if I were a shrink. And I said, well, it's not an either or thing. Psychotic experiences, who's to say they're not at least sometimes genuine spiritual experiences, because it'd be such a shock. You're not going to take it in stride. And I've had at least a couple, 2 or 3 really powerful dreams where in one of them I was in a clearing in woods, and I began to see, I don't know, maybe in the moonlight, a figure walking through the trees toward me. And as he came closer, I could see him in color. And as he emerged from the trees, I could see this was Jesus. And I woke up immediately, my heart pounding. Like, why? Well, it was the numinous experience of this. Another time I had really a Gnostic dream where I was fleeing God up a 7-story tower and having to go through one door after another. And I somehow thought I had stolen something. I think it was sort of suggested by the movie Time Bandits, which was current at the time. And like the dwarves who had stolen the map of the universe from God and were going on a treasure hunt. Well, I had stolen something from God and was trying to flee from him. And I thought, oh boy, I've earned the wrath of God now. But when I got to the top and the last door opened, there was just a flood of light that just signaled love and acceptance. What I had feared was actually just what I needed. And again, I awoke, and there have been other ones where, and when it was in a period where I was no longer a believer, but I've always been open to and interested in all this stuff. Well, I don't think I would have any kind of experience like that in the ordinary, sane, work-a-day world. Somehow dreams are opening a door, not necessarily to things actually happening in another dimension, like in the multiverse, science fiction and comics and all that. But Jung would say, well, it is another world, a parallel world that is interior, just like God is interior. There's not a God up there, out there, like the moon orbiting the earth or something, or at least it doesn't matter. God is in us as the big ruling archetype, and that's good enough. I mean, how else would you want it to be real? It's something that is like the energy source and the guiding voice of individuation, which is what the Gnostics called finally attaining Gnosis. He says, is God real? Well, he's real inside. That's all it needs to be. And it sure does exist there. So, the rest of it's a waste of time.
Yeah, and what you just said, this Jungian concept of individuation, if anyone doesn't know, he describes it in the Red Book. He has a vision of Jesus and Satan battling in the cosmos, going up into the Pleroma, and none of them win. They just kind of freeze into infinity in this sort of dualism that for all time. And he calls it the individuation of the two opposite. When you see your shadow, your opposite. It's like attaining Gnosis, where it's like you can how do I pronounce, how do I say it? It's like your shadow is the opposite of you, everything you hate about yourself and the world, but you come to understand it, and you come to be able to live with it, and sort of it sort of opens up a more self actualization of you. Like it becomes more of a process of becoming, you know, which is where he used the words individuation. Now, where do you think this all comes from? This Jungian type of Gnosticism. What do you think this thing comes out of?
Different types of mysticism of the West. He says it's not like Buddhism and Hinduism, which are trying to just slough off the ego and attain a state of placid rest. No, it is attaining something through struggle, and it's the persona and the shadow that are struggling to ultimately unite in a capital S self. You can't do it without both. And this feeds over into the Jungian ethic, like in Eric, not Eric Fromm, boy, Depth Psychology and a New Ethic by, I'll remember later one, I don't need to, a disciple of Jung. He said that you have to give the devil his due. The shadow side of you is as much you as the daylit side, the persona, and you've got to incorporate it somehow, and because that's the only way that you can attain the pleroma. The pleroma is the selfhood. He says all of this is not ontological; it's psychological.
Right.
The words are not necessary. Gnosis is not knowledge of a system. It's a process of struggling with the two to come up with some kind of integrated whole. And when you do, that's the pleroma. Come unto me and I will give you rest. Now, personally, this completely, oh, Eric Neumann was the guy I was thinking.
Okay.
This makes complete sense to me. Well, I probably shouldn't say that. I mean, there's depths to it I'm far from understanding, but it really does ring true to me because I am a fan of horror fiction and monster movies and of religion and heroic fantasy and the Bible and all that. And I see the difference, but it's not exactly a contradiction. To me, it is like even though it seems a combative dualism, good versus evil, and all that, it ultimately winds up being a complementary one, like the yin and yang and the Tao. Mm-hmm. And that is my experience. And Fritz Leiber, a disciple of Lovecraft, pointed out why. He said Lovecraft understood that that the primal emotion is fear, and he was trying to articulate what Rudolf Otto said, that there is the mysterium tremendum, the mystery that makes us tremble, holy terror, panic in the classic sense. And then there is the mysterium fascinans, that which fascinates and enthralls because you know that it promises the very thing you lack and need. You cannot be complete without it. So you have to respond to both the mysterium tremendum and the mysterium fascinans, which is why we react in horror movies by I don't want to look, but I gotta look. There's I mean, this is on a crude level, but it's the same instinct. It repels, but it's fascinating. How can that be? It's all limit language. It takes you to the limits of experience and belief, and that's stretching yourself in a way you need to do.
Yeah, and so Heraclitus points out that God and evil, or good and evil, are one. And so this sort of individuation process is like we have this illusion that we know what good and evil are, and it's always an illusion that we don't understand our opposites really. We don't understand the opposite sides. And it's like the process of actualizing oneself, becoming more complete, reveals one's special individual structure. It shows universal human traits and possibilities are combined in each individual in a way that's unlike anyone else. So an individual or individuality embraces our innermost, less incomparable uniqueness. It also implies becoming oneself. We can therefore translate individuation as coming to selfhood or self-realization. And like you mentioned, the yin and the yang thing, because within every opposite is a little kernel of what you see as good or evil, but also on your, it's like how you have this concept where Christianity comes along and says, okay, this is all evil, this is all paganism, this is all witchcraft, all these are bad. But when you go back to the ancient world, some of those ideas were seen as the ancient rites of connecting to what is good. So how does that happen? Well, there's a problem here. We need to get beyond good and evil and put these two dualist ideas aside and try to find what is the self or the pleroma and access this infinite world of the unconscious. Crazy concept to think about. It's not something you can do in one day, but it's something that I think, and I talk to a lot of people who are into this Jungian stuff, and they swear by it. They're like this one. I know a PhD psychologist who treats people who have like they've been to war or they've been raped or victims who have real bad trauma, and they have these sort of methods, these Jungian methods, and they swear that it works. People can start over a new life with a new mindset about the world that's not so black and white, basically, if that makes sense. So that dualism concept sort of becomes a monastic concept.
Yeah, because the pleroma, the divine fullness in the world of finitude, is like white light broken up into the spectrum. There is a new apparent difference revealed, or is it distorted? It's in Vedanta they call these upadhis, or limiting conditions that refract perception. And so good and evil are sides of the divine pleroma that look different to us because of the distortion in which we live. And that's what we have to, like Tantra is all about this. We have to leapfrog that by, giving the devil his due, dining with the devil with a long spoon, in an attitude of mere witness. And it's the left-handed path. But you've got to do it in some form. Not just licentiousness, but experiencing the dark side by breaking the law, but in a certain state of mind. In the Kabbalah, they say that when God created the world, well, God is infinite. How could he create anything else? Well, in symbolic terms, they say, okay, God withdrew into himself to leave ontological space for something else to exist. I mean, if God is infinite, where are you going to put anything else? Well, they say he shrank back into himself. I think it's called the Tzimtzum. And what was left was this void, but God cannot really reduce himself. So somehow the dark side was also God, which explains where evil comes from. It's the night side of God. and you have to somehow experience that and take it into yourself to restore the divine glory in yourself and in God. I mean, it's amazing, and admittedly, the language is symbolic and gives out rationally pretty quickly, but it's pointing to things people claim to have experienced. I
Well,
can't say
well,
they didn't.
think about it like this. One of some of the greatest films or series on Netflix or HBO, like Game of Thrones or Star Wars, for example, the greatest characters are the most complex characters.
Mm-hmm.
You have Darth Vader, Anakin
Mm,
Skywalker, where he literally becomes evil incarnate, and
mm,
then has a moment, an awakening, if you will, where he realizes that holy shit, I'm on the wrong side of things, and he, makes an act of what do you want to call it? An act of salvation.
contrition.
Yeah, tries to help out Obi-Wan or who was it in the where he decides that he's going to help, when the Emperor is about to kill Luke Skywalker. Yeah,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
where Vader finally says, "Wait a minute, this is the moment right here."
Mm,
That's like his individuation right there. But also you have characters like Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones. All she wants is the throne. She wants control. She wants power. And then realizes that it's all about a family thing. It's all about love. It's all about and so you see these characters get very complex. And I feel like that they're maybe they're not Jungian themselves, these character people who are writing these scripts or the directors, but they're getting at the same thing. What they're getting at to the core is everyone has really we're all complex. What we think of good and evil is not really that black and white. There are reasons why people think differently from each other. I've read articles that Jung got criticized for being a Nazi sympathizer. Not sure how true that is, but I can almost see why someone would say that because he seems like the type of person who is more trying to literally figure out what are these people thinking more than quick to jump on and say evil, evil. That seems like the type of person Jung would be. So I can sort of see that. I'm not sure why they said that, but that's another topic for another day.
yeah, I've not heard that, but it kind of makes sense because there is a strange beauty about the Nazi chic. Once you find out what they were doing, that doesn't matter. It's so loathsome.
Right.
You can't really give them a break. But if they weren't doing that, and that stuff wasn't inherent in the whole Aryan shtick and all that stuff, it's like.
Well, if you want to wonder how does the human condition get to that place? Like it's a crazy process to get to. How does people in the 20th century end up in a place like that? That's probably what Jung was trying to figure out. Now, but even to bring it back to what we were saying about this whole even Jesus, like what makes the character of Jesus so compelling in the ancient world? You have this character who's the Logos. And I was just reading about the Logos and how the context of this word by the Middle Platonists before Christianity, like people, even before the Middle Platonists, like Heraclitus uses the word and Plato uses the word. And it's used about by a lot of these ancient writers as the idea of there's two things. There's the Logos and then there's the, what was the word? Hold on a second. I have it right here. It was the Logos and it was the hold on a second. Let me just find this. 1 second. Oh, measure. Okay, here it is. Measure. So you have measure and you have essence. So okay, this is good. Check this out, right? So the Logos is essence in a sense. This is Heraclitus. And the other word is, hang on a second. I'm trying to find the right word so I can say the right Greek word for this. So I don't get this wrong. I'll just cut this part out. Measure. Where is it? Common measure, sum total.
Well, the Logos is the the force of balance and proportion.
Right.
It's why not all the rain falls at once, not all the autumn leaves fall in one big dump, why the world doesn't catch fire completely and be destroyed. There's
Yeah.
this balance, and that's the logos, the sense of proportion.
Yeah. So, okay, so what Heraclitus was getting at was that you have people who are living a prescribed life. And in the context of Christianity, this idea of the logos being the essence of truth and wisdom. And you have, what is he up against? He's up against Pharisees and Sadducees who are living a prescribed life under the law of Moses. They're pretending to be something prescribed to them. The logos doesn't care about all of that. The logos is what it is. It is the essence of truth and wisdom without any prescriptions of laws. It just is that way. So it counteracts against these prescribed ways of life, and it is the truth. So it doesn't mean that it's against the law. It doesn't mean that it's saying the laws are wrong. It's saying there are times to use the law, and there are times to, if you need to pick right on the Sabbath, do it. If you need to turn the other cheek, do it. It doesn't matter that it says it on a piece of paper. Great. But do we do it every time? No. There are instances where we have to use our brains and think outside the box. Oh, it's the Sabbath. You have some of your livestock fall into a ditch. Well, it says it right here in the law that we shouldn't touch it. No, come on. Don't be stupid. Grab that thing out. That's the right thing to do. That is what we're getting at. The going beyond good and evil is what the logos is.
Yeah, all laws are contingent. Given most situations, it's like a rule of thumb. This is what it's proper to do, but who knows? It does depend on the situation. Aristotle was big on this. It depends on your ability, the danger involved, and so on, as to whether the same act is cowardice or boldness or whatever. Well, the logos is not conditional and contingent. It's just the sole force, and it may be expressed in obedience to the laws, which are the best we can do to prescribe a kind of philosophy, as Jacob Neusner said. What seems like a bunch of pettifogging, neurotic stuff to outsiders is actually a philosophy of civilization to sanctify every moment of every day. And it could have been different. You could have eaten shellfish, but not beef. Who knows? It wouldn't have mattered if the Torah had prescribed one or the other. But the fact that in the Messianic age, that stuff will not even apply anymore. So in a sense, it couldn't have been absolute truth. But what is the absolute truth? I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I would have to say it's love and so on in the New Testament sense.
Yeah, and that's what's so brilliant about this character in the New Testament, who's the Logos, and it makes you wonder because another definition for Logos could be law. So like, I am the law, I am that. Like, he is the essence of truth and wisdom and the law itself. So it makes you then you have to ask, if he was around today, would he be saying the same things? No, he would be a different type of logos in today's context.
I would have to think so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
You made me think of another great figure, Judge Dredd. I am the law. Remember?
Yeah.
My younger daughter Veronica was a crossing guard in elementary school, and I told her that she was like Judge Dredd, and if anybody gave her any lip, she ought to say, "I am the law." But that's in I think it's Second Baruch. They're talking about what elsewhere would be called the Word, very much like the first chapter of the Gospel of John, but instead it's the Torah that was pre-existent.
Right.
And so they kind of made the two one. And what would that be? Is it synecdoche or metonymy or something like that? they're trying to say that, I think they're trying to say that it's not simply the same thing, but that's what it amounts to. For us, the Logos is the Torah. For somebody else, like in the Messianic age, it may change, but given the way the world is now, this is the expression of it.
Yeah. Now, before we record, you were saying something about this 7 Sermons of the Dead by Jung. Mm-hmm. What is this about?
He talked about of course, the archetypes and how they come to light. And there's a danger that people will so closely identify with one of the archetypes that they experience what he called inflation of the archetype, where you simply identify with it. And people that do that become dangerous fanatics. But he said that's a danger that's worth risking, because it's a case of the active imagination, where you enter into the depths of your unconscious and see what comes out. And it starts out, Stephen Holler, who started a Gnostic church.
Wow. So he used the Jungian Gnosticism as the basis for his church?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Explicitly.
Wow.
And Holler was a genuine scholar, and he stumbled on the original text of this and was just taken aback, like it was an epiphany, and began a career of plunging into Jungianism, and realized that Gnosticism was a real and living thing, that, yeah, you had to modernize it, kind of like Bultmann talking about demythologizing. In fact, that whole notion came up with the work of one of Bultmann's students, Hans Jonas, in a book called The Gnostic Religion, where he was really the first to broach this and say, what kind of a person would be interested in this strange cosmology and this weird view of life? It's some sort of alienation. And then he starts looking at the depths, and that seems to have inspired Bultmann to say, well, what do you know? All myths express a group's self-understanding of their existence in the world. And like in Hinduism, karma and the caste system, it's this inflexible thing, a kind of a destiny machine that you are stuck with. And the best thing you can do is to just obey it. And if you don't follow your dharma, you're going to be incarnated as a monkey next time or something like that. But if you have a religion of salvation, that, hey, I got good news, Christ has freed us from the dominion of the stars, the planets, astrology, and all that stuff. We don't have an inescapable fate anymore. Well, that's really what's going on in the exorcism stories. That's the psychological value. And Jung said that what Gnosticism says and its myths don't have any metaphysical value. They're all to be experienced, because that's what led to them. And here's what he said: the dead came back from Jerusalem, where they did not find what they were seeking. They asked admittance to me and demanded to be taught by me, and thus I taught them. Hear ye, I begin with nothing. Nothing is the same as fullness. In the endless state, fullness is the same as emptiness. The nothing is both empty and full. One may just as well state some other thing about the nothing, namely that it is white, or that it is black, or that it exists, or that it exists not. That which is endless and eternal has no qualities, because it has all qualities. And he said this was in this epiphanic state where he had become Basilides, one of the great Gnostic
Yeah.
teachers. And was he insane? I don't think so, but it was this kind of transformative experience. Oh, here's a little bit more to this. This is great. He's talking. Yeah, the dead approached like mist out of the swamps, and they shouted, "Speak to us further about the highest God." Abraxas is the God whom it is difficult to know. His power is the very greatest because man does not perceive it all. Man sees the summum bonum, the greatest good, of the sun, and also the infimum malum of the infinite evil, I guess, of the devil. But Abraxas he does not see, for he is undefinable life itself, which is the mother of good and evil alike. And he read on in a steady though subdued voice, and I won't beat this to death. He is fullness, uniting itself with emptiness. He is the sacred wedding. He is love and the murder of love. He is the Holy One and his betrayer. He is the brightest light of day and the deepest night of madness. To see him means blindness. To know him is sickness. To worship him is death. To fear him is wisdom. Not to resist him means liberation. Such is the terrible Abraxas. He is the mightiest manifest being, and in him creation becomes frightened of itself. He is the revealed protest of creation against the Pleroma and its nothingness. He is the terror of the sun, which he feels against his mother. He is the love of the mother for her son. He is the delight of earth and the cruelty of heaven. Man becomes paralyzed before his face. Before him there exists neither question nor answer. He is the life of creation. He is the activity of differentiation. He is the love of man. He is the speech of man. He is both the radiance and the dark shadow of man. He is deceitful reality. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, and he in his red book, he talks about Abraxas. He says, "This is a God you know nothing about, because mankind forgot him. We call him by his name Abraxas. He is more indefinite than God and the devil. To distinguish him from God, we call the God Helios, or sun. Abraxas is effect. Nothing stands opposed to him but the ineffective. Hence, his effective nature unfolds itself freely." Now, so Abraxas is actually a concept that was brought forth by Basilides, one of the early Christians of Alexandria, who created this god. You've seen him on my channel. He's on my thumbnail. He has the head of a rooster, a body of a man, and legs of a serpent, signifying air, land, and water, the three main elements. His name Abraxas has a gematria in Greek of 365 for the days of the year. He also has 7 letters for the 7 planets, 7 days of the week, and he has 3 consonants and 4 consonants and 3 vowels. So you multiply those, you get 12 for the months of the year. So he is literally a calendar inside of a name, inside of a concept, and basically he's like Saturn, where he's time itself. He's also the elements itself. So what that means is, whether you believe in him or not, he is the everything. He's reality. Doesn't matter if you believe in Abraxas or not. He's unfolding in front of you right now. When the sun, the sun gives its nutrients to plants and they grow, that's him. That's him making this. There's basically what the Gnostics were saying was, Abraxas is effect. It's the reality unfolding in front of us that we are inside of. We can't escape, whether we like it or not, whether we believe in it or not is meaningless. It doesn't matter because it's there. Like time is a thing that we don't understand. It's just happening. You can't stop it. You can't pause. You can't say, I want out of this. You're trapped. You're in it. That's Abraxas. That's a freaky thing to think about.
Yeah, it does somehow convey the mysterium tremendum and the mysterium fascinans. And so great is this divinity, it really makes the notion of blasphemy ludicrous. These people that wanted to kill Salman Rushdie because he's dissing God in some way. Are you telling me God needs a punk like you to defend him? Do you think God cares? I mean, does an ant care what who's running the picnic and all that? It's just ludicrous. I mean, to think that blasphemy is punishable because it offends God, that's blasphemy.
So just to show you what this gematria thing, it's right here. Alpha is 1, beta is 2, pi 100, and then you get 365 if you add it all up. So he literally is the reality incarnate. Like, he's the only deity of the ancient world that actually is basically a representation of reality itself. So to me it's a fascinating thing, because what you're doing is you're creating a name and an identity for the reality that we're inside of. So it's a linguist, like, you can say the Abraxas doesn't exist, it's a human construct. Yeah, sure it is, but reality does exist. Whether we call it Abraxas or we call it reality, doesn't matter. We're arguing over linguistics now, because reality exists. We're in reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Tillich was a personal friend of Jung and had a lot in common with him, and even used to say to him, you should go ahead the one more step and say the archetypes are the structure of being. Tillich was an ontologist. He was an existentialist, but he believed you could speak about the structure of being, and idealist metaphysics. And Jung said he didn't want to go that far because he's just mapping out experience, which is kind of a Buddhist thing. They supposedly are not interested in ontology, though it sounds like it, but no, they're not.
Right.
And this led Jung to say, you can't say that God exists or doesn't, because the question presupposes that God is one among many beings. And you could say, well, he's the supreme being like Zeus, but that's not supposed to be the idea in Christian theology or various other ones. God is not some guy, the cosmic Santa Claus.
And that's so Plato made that really clear in his book Republic, in book 3. This idea, this Homeric idea of these gods that cry and get mad and angry, we gotta get rid of that and replace it with something better, because there's a demiurge and he's perfect. I think that's interesting how, because a lot of these early Christians, especially Philo before Christianity, they were Platonists. I'm not. I think there's something to do. I think there's a lot of influence in that on Gnostics with Plato, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. But
some scholars said Gnosticism is Platonism run riot. And I think, that's exactly true. Right.
Yeah.
Boy.
But you made a good point though, because these archetypes, where you have these different archetypes of personality, of symbols, or just experiences, and that sort of seems to be the universal language throughout all of these different theologies or worldviews. Or what do you think about the archetypes? Do you think there's some truth to this thing?
Oh yeah, I think that you really got all the empirical proof you need by doing what Jung did and said, you tell me how the same images appear in all different cultures, in different media, like fairy tales, mandalas, myths, and so on. How you tell me how come this stuff irrepressibly pops up throughout history worldwide if it's not hardwired into the brain somehow, which is no spooky, silly thing. It's like Jerome Bruner said about language function. We're not born with innate knowledge, but we are somehow born with the ability to learn vocabulary and then formulate sentences we've never heard anybody say. That's language function. It's there already, and it's the same thing. I mean, this is a bit more complex, but it seems obvious. There has to be this framework of images, some geometric shapes, some literary characters that just pop up all over the place. And why? Well, we have to be exposed to them to have them rise out of the unconscious if we are to start on the path of individuation. My favorite analogy for this is like you're opening up a new computer, and suddenly there are all these icons on the screen, and you got to click on them to open up the programs. Well, in Jung's terms, the archetypes are like these icons on the screen. Do you want to use the potential of the machine? Well, you've got to hit on the icons. How do you do that? Well, observation for one thing, reading, dreaming, visions, seeing art that embodies it and that awakens it in you. That's why when religion isn't just neurosis, like Freud said. I mean, he was right about all of that stuff, but that's not the whole story. And Jung is saying, here's the positive, indeed the necessary role of religion. You don't even have to call it religion, but you're going to find it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's like this symbol right here where you get this Sol Invictus, this hero with the Phrygian hat and the cape. He's killing the bull. Well, this image shows up in Mithras, also shows up in Gilgamesh, also shows up, and you could even say that in the Old Testament with David when he's a hunter going off and killing a lion. There's something about that brings this sort of imagery of the hero slaying the bull. Even now, the game Zelda. Are you familiar with this game Zelda?
No, I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it.
Character, his name is Link in Zelda. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. Character Link Zelda, and he looks like Orpheus, Mithra. He has that Phrygian hat. He looks like the hero. I'll show you right now. But there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. I'll get to that in 1 second. I want to show one of the biggest games in the world. Japan, America, Europe. Look at him. I mean, he looks like he could be Orpheus. He could be Sol Invictus. He has the hero look. And is that on purpose? I don't know. I don't think it is. But maybe unconsciously, whoever created up this character was thinking, without thinking, that this is something like this. You know what I mean? And so the reason why I bring that up is because even when Christianity came about, where a lot of these people living in the Roman Empire who were in different mystery religions, there was Hellenized Jews, there was Mithra worshippers, there was Osiris worshippers, everything was Attis and Cybele, and you had this idea of Jesus and the Eucharist, and there's also the idea of in the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter and Osiris, the vine and the grain. It's like a Eucharist almost. Well, a lot of these Christians early on recognize that, and you get these groups like the Nazarenes who are comparing. They're literally comparing Jesus to Attis, to Osiris, to Adamus, to Pan, even, and they're seeing an archetype in Jesus, whether he lived or not. They thought he did. They didn't think he was a myth, but they still think that he was an embodiment of the Savior, the Soter, the salvation archetype.
And whoever quoted that, the writer goes on to say, "We are the only true Christians." Boy, oh boy.
Right. That's Hippolytus, I think. Yeah. That's the Nicene preacher. Yeah. Yeah. That's and that. What does that tell you? They they're convinced that what they're doing is based off the teachings of Jesus, the what the Bible is saying. They're not trying to be heretics. They're not trying to go against the grain. They are doing what they think is the truth. They are following the logos, and that's where it brought them.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't say one's wrong and one's right. It's just different varieties of the same thing.
And non-Christians were very ready to admit that. Like Dionysus, well, what do you know? Sounds a lot like Osiris. It must be the same guy, which is entirely reasonable. It's like Christians and Muslims. You Muslims, who is this God you worship? Well, the same one you do. Look at the Quran. It's obvious it's the God of the Bible. Son of a gun, what do you know?
Yeah, and in ancient Egypt, there's writers who, during the Hyksos period, the Hyksos came down from the north in Syria and Turkey, and they came down and sort of gained control of the government and became the elites for a few hundred years. And they were looking for a god in Egypt that resembled their god, who's a storm god, Baal. So they're coming from lands that worship Baal, but they're going into lands that have a god named Typhon or Set. They're like, yeah, he's the sky god, he's the storm god. That's him. So while they're in Egypt, they adopt Set or Typhon to the Greeks as their god, and because they're adopting to the cultural, but they're also seeing an archetype and they're going to play around with it. And so I think that happens later on too with the Ptolemies. When the Ptolemies come down into Egypt and take control after Alexander the Great, they want to keep the culture alive. They don't want the people to rebel against them. So instead, they come up with this god Serapis, who's like Zeus, because they're familiar with that. Zeus is their god. They're from Greece. They're Greeks. They're Macedonians, but they're not going to just let go of Zeus. What do we do? Oh, Serapis. He's Osiris and he's Zeus at the same time. And there you go. That's the archetype right there. So I think the same thing happens when all these new religions come about. They're not copying the religions before them. They're coming up with new ideas, but sometimes unconsciously happening where they come up with an idea that seems to reflect older ideas without even realizing, because it's just in the air. It's just part of the atmosphere.
Plus, it's like reinventing the wheel. Everybody is going to have a fertility god because everybody needs fertility. Yes. Everybody is going to have a war god because you have wars and you need all the help you can get, etc., etc. It's no surprise that there are saviors and all that, and that they're very similar. Was one borrowed from the other? Could be, but there's no way to know, and it doesn't really matter. Yeah. And from a skeptical point of view, saying that, well, this stuff is not literally true, you can say, look, I'm not saying they stole it. I am saying that it's the same kind of thing. And so why do you insist one of them is literally true and the others are not? I mean, that's the value of the showing the parallels. It's not that somebody violated copyright or something. We don't know what happened there, but you're faced with a whole bunch of very similar saviors. Why think one of them is historically real?
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Like Joseph, the character Joseph, he goes down into Egypt, gets put into the dungeon, which is like the underworld. Yeah. He seems to be a lot like Osiris.
Oh yeah.
And then you also have Abraham, who gets the title of the bosom of Abraham, becomes a title for heaven in later texts by Josephus and in the New Testament, with the story of the poor man and Lazarus, where the poor man's sitting up in the bosom of Abraham and the other guy's down in Hades trying to get some water. So Abraham, you can almost argue, is a reflection of Aranos, who's heaven, the god heaven, and Jacob, who's called Israel in the Phoenician text, there's a Phoenician myth where a god who's called Israel offers up his only begotten son named Judah to Aranos. Wow. So It almost makes you wonder, are they borrowing from the Phoenicians, or are they both sort of interpreting the same thing differently? Who knows?
Yeah.
But the succession of these different father gods that are the patriarchs in the Old Testament, who are basically Euhemerized gods, basically, I think there's some sort of archetypal thing at play here, you know. And then to bring it back to the last example of this, right in the first beginning of Genesis, in the beginning, actually, I have a picture of it right here. I have I can read the Greek too. En arche epoion sen o theos ton aronos kai ten gain. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. See in blue and green, how I made those blue and green. Aronos and Gaia are two gods. From Hesiod's theogony, the first two gods that come out of chaos, in the beginning it was chaos, and then leaps out of chaos, you have heaven and earth. So in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. In the pagan tradition and theogony by Hesiod, in the beginning, chaos brought forth Auranos and Gaia, heaven and earth. It's the same thing. Just one of them has gods, the other one doesn't. I think that's a good example.
The cosmogony is so similar through, and the cosmology, the map of the universe, is so similar throughout the ancient world, because you'd have to be an idiot not to think the earth is flat. The sky is a solid dome that reaches down all around the round, flat earth, and that it has windows through which the rain comes down. You'd have to think that. Given the state of astronomy and travel and all that, you'd be an idiot. You'd be insane not to. It's only later that they had the tools to find out what's really going on. And so that was primitive or pre-technological science. And that's the rainbow, right? Well, what the heck is that thing? Well, it must be God's war bow. He's saying, look, I'm hanging it up. There's going to be peace now between us. Well, in the Gilgamesh epic, Oruru says, I swear by my necklace of lapis lazuli that I'll never flood them out again. So that was their view of the rainbow. What I mean, how do you know any better?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if the coat of many colors has something to do with the rainbow effect too. Joseph wears the coat of many colors. I always wondered what that meant. It
might be, you could translate it as the coat with long sleeves. So it might or might not mean that. Either one's possible.
I've heard people think that the coat of many colors means that Joseph represents multiculturalism. He's going down into Egypt. He's not exactly the traditional son of Jacob that you're gonna see. He's gonna do something different. That could be one thing. I don't know. That's just, I've heard that before.
It strikes me as modernizing.
Yeah, it sort of makes sense, but it's also, you're right. It seems like a modern viewpoint, which, yeah, I guess you're right there. But regardless of all of this, I think what's important too is the fact that they don't change this, because by the time the Septuagint's get written, they have an idea of astronomy and astrology that's way beyond the idea of there being a gate up there. They know it's not true. They don't care. It's, to them, I don't think it matters it wasn't meant to be taken literal. Wherever they forgot this idea of this means it has to be literal, I wonder if it's a Lutheran thing, when Martin Luther puts up his 95 Thesis and they start to get more strict on what the scriptures actually say. There is no purgatory, there is no indulgences. That's not biblical. And then I think that started a new movement of like, well, what does the Bible actually say? And now you get this literalism thing happening. But before that, no one cared about it literally saying. They're trying to look for a theological meaning behind this stuff, right? So it's
of course they had no reason to doubt it either. It was only once science began to say, "Hey, take a second, look at it. That's not what the Bible says."
Yeah.
But like with the Gate of God, for instance, the Tower of Babel must have been a ziggurat, which an artificial mountain to build an altar on top to mimic the high places that the Babylonians had originally had on the naturally occurring hills. Well, they didn't want to change the style of their worship, so Bab El means the gate of God. Did these guys actually think they could launch into heaven? No, of course not. I mean, there were many of them. They mean like you were contacting God through sacrifice. So that would be a prime example of how they weren't literalists on everything.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Mm.
Anything else what do you think about this? To bring it back to Jung or even just Gnosticism, today's Gnosticism, what do you think about the state of what is your opinion on all this? Do you think it's an interesting worldview? Do you think it's useful? Do you think it's dumb? What do you think? Let's hear your
Well,
thoughts.
it's like literalism again. I think it's so important when Jung said this isn't a map of what invisible things there are. This has to be understood psychologically, because I mean that's not much of a reach. The even literally, it's about transformation and so on. Just like ancient yoga stuff was about that. It talked about God's resident in the chakras and all that, but even that is practically saying it's within you. You're releasing your potential. And the same thing with the Gnostic mythology. It's communicating something. You might literally believe it, but that's not really the point. It's kind of it's like Levi Strauss in his great essay The Effectiveness of Symbols, where he describes a shaman to whom is brought a woman who cannot seem to give birth, though she's hugely pregnant. What's the matter? Well, this guy has no medicine or anything, but he starts up this chant about summoning all of these primitive mythic characters like grandfather alligator. We call on you and this one and that one to fight the demons who are stopping this delivery. And as it goes on and everybody's getting into it, she gives birth. Well, are there really these demons and spirits? No, you need somehow to have a handle on what's going on inside. And that's what myth and ritual do. You're like, if you're clicking, if you got the icons on the computer screen, you gotta click on them. Well, how do you click on them in religion? Through ritual. That's baptizing and so on. It's not like something magical is happening. It's just that we're physical beings and we have to act into certain things. I mean, you're not married if you don't have a marriage ceremony, and it's not going to stick the same way. The war isn't over until you sign a peace treaty. What is that, a magic piece of paper? No, but it's a symbolic action that we have agreed will change things. And that's kind of what happens in religion. So it's all psychology and myths and stories that enable us to change imaginatively in the imagination and get the business done of becoming enlightened or whatever. So I think that is true, and it doesn't require any superstitious beliefs. No, it's just psychology and very profound. And so you demythologize it, which means you don't get rid of the mythical language, you interpret it, as Tillich and Bultmann both said. So I think, science doesn't harpoon this. It's like a whole different thing. In fact, it helps elucidate what is happening in it. And as Stephen Holler said, yeah, there are things about ancient Gnosticism we wouldn't want to continue, like the hatred of the physical body. That's neurotic. We don't have to do that. But it's still a very valuable thing. Oh, yeah. And one last thing, I think there's a danger in it, in that people, just like Zen Buddhism, they say the paraphernalia of Buddhism, the rituals, the doctrines, they're not an end in themselves. Don't think you are enlightened because you understand the Dharma. No, no. Same thing here. You're not expanding your consciousness just because you believe some things other people don't. Oh, now I know about the chakras, and now I know about the demiurge, and so that's, you might as well believe in Superman, right? I mean, if that's all it is, and no, you've got to get into it psychologically and be transformed, which presumably you can.
Yeah. Do you? This is just. I just thought of some crazy. While you were saying that, you just gave me some ideas. Like, do you think that this would be a Gnostic thing to try to interpret these myths into some other form? Like, for example, Garden of Eden. Some people depict it as like Garden of Eden being twins in a womb, and taking that bite of the apple is like sort of kicking and wanting out of the womb, not knowing that you're about to enter a world that is like their end game is death. You have all you need here. Nutrients come right to you. You don't got to go anywhere. You're safe and sound in the womb. But once you leave the womb, you'll be like a god, the god that's giving you all this stuff. You'll be just like that god, but you're going to die. Like, do you think that's sort of what the idea of is sort of like decoding these myths of what they are and interpreting them, like Wizard of Oz pulling down the curtain? What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, that does seem to me to capture the point of it. How did we become? How come like we're only less than God, and yet we die? And so this explains the astonishing riddle. And what you said about the womb imagery, that really says it very well. It's an analogy or another version of the same story. I don't think you're discrediting it. It's not reductionism, and there's always a good reason to do that.
And it also explain how Eve is created from the rib of Adam. How does that happen? Well, when there's a split, when there's twins, they split. The cell splits.
Oh yeah,
that's like sounds like some ancient science right there. But
yeah.
But yeah, it's still fun to think about. But yeah, I don't know. This has been fun. I don't know if you have anything else you want to say.
No, I've bored everybody into a coma already.
No, you won't. But yeah, this has been fun, and we'll have you back on soon, and we'll definitely have another chat like this very soon.
You bet.
You have just attained true Gnosis. The Demiurge has no power over you.